Hey guys, Dev back with Crime Hive, and we're back again with the Lori Vallow Daybell case. Huge updates. I'm sure most of you guys that have been following this case are aware that Chad Daybell has been arrested, and this was just 3 days ago on June 9th, 2020. And we're going to talk about some insights here, how police would have arrested him, kind of how that process worked, and then we're going to talk also what happens next with the investigation. We're going to talk a little bit about the forensic side of this and kind of what that looks like in identifying these remains. So again, if you guys don't know what's going on, Chad Daybell, search warrant was executed at his house in Salem, Idaho, and 2 unidentified human remains, sets of remains, were found near his property, and it is believed to be J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan's remains. Now, that's not confirmed through the investigative aspect of it by police, but there have been family members that have come forward to media and told media that it was, in fact, J.J. and Tylee's remains. And so the family's mourning. Again, this is a very sad case. This is a huge update. This sounds like justice is in the process of being served after just the bizarre story that we've all been following. So we're going to talk about this a little bit deeper. And again, many of you guys are aware of already what's happening with the arrest. We're going to talk about some different aspects. I'm going to give you some different perspectives of this case. And again, before I dig into that, Dev with Crime Hive, subscribe to my channel if you like these kind of videos. Also covering other cases as well that are going on. So take a look at some of those other videos, but let's focus on this and let's get into it. So back to Chad here. This is the booking photo. He was arrested. Looks a little eerie. Looks a little older. Looks, you know, like, I mean, this face just kind of shows it all. I think he knows he's done for. He, you know, this is just the beginning of the end for Chad. Now, what do you guys think of this arrest so far? From what you've heard, do you guys think that Lori Vallow may have, you know, given insights to investigators on where the children were located and how they were found? Some of you may be thinking, okay, well, there was a police raid earlier on the same property back in January of 2020. They did collect electronic, you know, cell phones, things like that, which may have helped during that investigation to find out where the children were located. So what do you guys think about that part of it? How do you think investigators found out the specific location of where the children were? Now, just to point out again here with this article here, so the prosecutor in the Idaho case did confirm that the remains were remains of children. So again, they haven't come forward to say specifically that it is the Tylee and JJ, but we do know, and it's coming through the pipeline here, that it most likely is going to be them. And we're going to talk about some of those aspects of it. Now, a couple things here that I want to talk about. This is the property again that FBI, they had, you know, forensics teams, evidence teams collecting data. They had a backhoe. They had, I mean, this was a very big operation. It seems like they had very pinpointed knowledge on where specifically to look. So, you know, you got to wonder, is Lori trying to save herself? Maybe to, you know, try to cut a deal with her arrest. You know, what's going on with that? Very curious as more information will come out. It's a sealed affidavit, so we don't know a lot of information right now. There's a lot more information we will figure out later on. But I want to talk about a couple things here. So we know Chad was arrested on June 9th, 2020. He was in his SUV, and you've got unmarked police cars, marked police cars. They were ready for him. It was about a mile from his house, and they arrested him. So just to give you guys an idea of what that might look like on a traditional stop when police are involved, it's called a high-risk stop or a felony stop. These would be felony charges that Chad's looking at. He's looking at concealing or hiding evidence. You know, this typically in Idaho, it's about a 5-year sentence for each charge. So there's 2 charges. Could be looking at 10 years just with this. Again, we don't know if he killed these children. If it is in fact the children, we don't know if he actually killed them. You know, you still got Alex Cox involved in this potentially, who's now dead. You know, we got to find out how these children died. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute too. But just to give you guys an idea of the stop the felony stop, just so you guys kind of get the realization of how this went down. I'm just going to play this little video, and I'll kind of explain them. I do a couple of these in this segment where I'm going to explain a couple of these insights here. So turn up your volume if you can. I'm streaming it live. It's going to come in live. Might have to turn up your volume as you're listening, but let's take a look here at this video on a police stop. This isn't the actual police stop, but it is one to give you an idea of what that could have looked like if you were seeing it live. Okay, so here you've got police giving commands to this person here. Typically, they'll give one set of commands, and right now, they're telling him to, put his hands out the window. We probably didn't see it, but they most likely would have had him turn off the ignition, and it's one step at a time that they're giving these commands. So they would have him, with one hand, take his seatbelt off, and again, they always want to see hands. That's the biggest thing there. They want to make sure that in this video, for example, this suspect doesn't have a weapon, a gun, or anything like that. So hands are important. They need to see that. So they're going to give these commands here.
Slowly step out of the vehicle. Face away from me. Hands so we can see them.
Okay, having him step away from him so we can't see what's going on behind him. Hands are always up in the air.
Step to the left of the car. Stop. Use your left hand and grab your collar at the top and pull your shirt out. Pull it out. Higher. Higher. Turn around slowly.
They have him lift his shirt up because, again, they're looking for a potential weapon. So they're going to look around the waistband area to make sure this person doesn't have a gun or weapon to try to engage in a firefight with them. And they just continue to have him spin around.
Keep turning. Stop. Put your shirt back down. Keep your hands in the air and walk back towards my voice. Slowly. Keep coming. Stop. Now you're going to sidestep to the right. Okay, do so now.
Okay, so just an idea, kind of what this would have looked like. This would have been a felony stop. I imagine this would have been similar to what they would have done with Chad Daybell when he was arrested. So moving forward here, again, we got the property there. One thing I wanted to point out here that, again, I mentioned the raid that they back when they went to Chad's home, they had collected documents, journals, cell phones, computers. So again, makes you wonder, did they have evidence from this information from that previous raid that led them to this current information? Another important note I wanted to mention, you guys, this was the house where Tammy Daybell died, okay, apparently from natural causes. And so it's the same home. What's interesting about this, again, in my belief personally, I'm curious what you guys believe as well, but I think there may be poison involved with these deaths. I think it's been very hard for the autopsies to get this information. It could be very difficult in this current case to find out if poison was involved because there's so many factors, and we're going to talk about that in a video here in just a minute that talks about the forensic aspect of it. But what do you guys think here about that? Same home. Another interesting thing that I got to point out, if you guys didn't know, just a side note here, we know that Chad was actually a grave digger at one point in his life. So very, very strange, right? And he actually wrote a book. It's called 1 Foot in the Grave, and it actually details his experience when he was a grave digger. So just wanted to mention that, a couple of quotes here. So here's the book here that he wrote. He wrote several other, types of fictional books and doomsday books. We know and I've got other videos on some of that stuff with the potential cult aspect and doomsday group and that sort of stuff. So anyway, going back to this here, there was a few things that he mentioned here in his book. So he would say, apparently he gave industry secrets away in this book, and he would say, we don't dig graves deeper than we have to. And he would say, taking care of graves and helping widows and grieving family members deal with trauma was rewarding. He also mentioned in that book that sad times are always when you have to bury babies. Crazy. Very ironic, you guys. Just wanted to give you guys that side note. Did you guys know that Chad was a gravedigger? That in itself is just eerie, and we've come to this point Very strange. Makes you wonder, though, if he did know these kind of trade secrets, these industry secrets, might he have done some other things to conceal evidence and help, to prevent investigators from maybe determining what happened, or other types of investigative leads that could lead to Chad. So there's a lot more that's going on with this investigation. So the last thing I want to talk about here, we're just going to discuss this video. I thought this was really interesting. This came from Court TV, and it's an interview with a forensic pathologist, I believe, and or anthropologist, and basically he explains kind of the process of identifying human remains and kind of how that looks. So I thought this was interesting to point up, and we're going to kind of discuss that, and then that'll be the end of this video. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this so far, if you like this, and let me know if you're able to hear the audio in the video pretty well as I'm doing this live. Let me know if that comes through clear. And here we go here.
What exactly goes into the process of trying to identify children?
Well, we're talking about the remains of two children, and so we need to know what the condition of the bodies are in. Are they completely skeletonized? I would assume after several months of burial that they would be skeletonized. So there are limitations on what you can do upon autopsy, and clearly the main goal is to identify the remains. What is their condition? Are any of the bones fractured? Is there any indication of how they died? A lot of questions come about, and the autopsy is the first place to go for answers.
And it's such an
So this is Dr. Kablinski, I believe, and a very renowned doctor. Has written several books, knows a lot about forensics, and kind of has helped pioneer that kind of aspect of cases in these criminal cases. So I'm just going to kind of play it, and we're going to talk a little bit more, kind of have a little discussion as we go through. But again, he's explaining kind of the autopsy process and kind of what that would look like, which is very important. And there's a lot of steps, and that's part of the reason why JJ and Tylee have not been identified. Now, there's a couple things he's going to talk about here, one of which, you've got dental records, which is a very quick way for investigators to determine who that person is. So if JJ or Tylee had some previous dental work, there might be some dental x-rays, some evidence there that can help link them to these bodies that they've located. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through this here.
Topic, but it is so critical, as these could yield some of the most damning charges that jurisprudence even offers. Can I ask you about the length of time that these remains may have been buried? We don't know. The charging documents are suggesting a very big window, September to June. But we also know that Idaho is extremely cold. Can you factor in some of those metrics?
Yes, temperature is one of the most important factors in the rate of decomposition of a body. Humidity is a factor. Are they buried below ground? How deep? How cold? How humid? A lot of these factors will determine the rate of decomposition, because bacteria like it nice and warm so that they can do their jobs as decomposers. So yes, that is a major factor in determining what the remains look like upon autopsy.
Yeah, so we know, JJ and Tylee were missing since September of last year. We kind of had this fall-winter period in Idaho, which is pretty cold during that time frame. It's not like Arizona or Florida or anything like that. So you do have a time period where those bodies are preserved and would not have decomposed as quickly. But then we kind of led into spring here. It's been several months, so kind of wonder what state they're in. Is there any tissue left on these bones? Is it just bones that they're working with, which can make it more difficult for the autopsy to determine, what kind of foul play occurred? Was there trauma involved? So we're gonna discuss more of that as we go through this here.
Obviously, the more decomposition that has set in on remains, the more difficult your job becomes as an ME. Can you explain some of the things we can still determine and some of the things we can't?
Well, a forensic anthropologist and an odontologist, a forensic dentist, would be looking at the remains, assuming that you have complete skeletonization. You can determine things such as the age of the individual by looking at the dentition and examining the skull. There are things you look for. Are there any fractures? Because
So yeah, skull and teeth can help them determine the approximate age of these individuals. So again, they already know that these remains are from children. So they've figured that out, and that makes you wonder also, were they wearing clothes? I mean, that would be one very quick way for them to determine, if this is potentially JJ or Tylee, just based on the clothing, or maybe any jewelry, anything like that they were wearing when they disappeared. So really curious to find out more about the autopsy results and that information. What do you guys think about that aspect of it? What are your thoughts on the autopsy? Again, it's a very sad case. It's I think a lot of us knew deep within that they were not going to be found alive, and this is going to kind of start the closure process with the family. But just a very bizarre case, and it's still not the end. We still have more things to come. There's more deaths involved around Chad and Lori, so it's going to be interesting as we continue through this process.
Your evidence could help identify the individuals.
If, say, someone has broken an arm and been treated, that will be identifiable, in remains.
Correct. And the same for any kind of repair to the dentition or the teeth of each of the individuals. By looking at repairs, amalgam fillings, and again, comparison to x-ray evidence.
That would require that there were dental appointments, that there were actual dentists during life, and those records might be tricky to also ascertain, especially if people live in many locales.
That is absolutely correct. And in addition to the autopsy, there needs to be some chemistry done, some analytical work. With skeletal remains, the best thing to do is a mitochondrial DNA analysis, because mitochondrial DNA are present in huge numbers in every cell. So there's a lot more
Yeah, if you guys remember mitochondrial DNA, huge development years ago. There was a lot of cold cases that police and investigators just couldn't solve. But with mitochondrial DNA, they can get really good samples now from such a small sample size, such a small amount. You can extract a better source of DNA, and it's helped investigators find so many other killers out there, and these cold cases, with rape and all sorts of stuff. So mitochondrial DNA, huge breakthrough really in the investigative process. Several years ago. It's just continuing to get better though, and it's evolved more with DNA. So they've got a lot more to work with here in these cases nowadays.
DNA that one could look at, even in a skeletonized body. That's very typical of a forensic analysis of skeletal remains, would be to do mitochondrial DNA. Each mitochondrion has more than one loop of DNA. So there's a lot of DNA that remains in skeletal remains. So what you need to do is a comparative analysis. First of all, compare each of the two children, look at their DNA to see if they match. If it does match, they could be siblings. And then to determine a maternal relative,
this is
whether
important.
It's a mother, a grandmother, who would share the same mitochondrial DNA, that would help determine the identity of the children.
And so what you're saying is that even if remains have decomposed to a point where they are just skeleton and there's no soft tissue, you can still retrieve that mitochondrial DNA.
Absolutely correct.
You also touched on something critical, and that is that it is the maternal connection that's most critical. So in order to determine who these children are officially, it is the mother and her relatives that will.
So yeah, talking about the mother, police most likely already have Lori Vallow's DNA on record. I mean, she's already arrested for a felony. Typically, when anybody's arrested for a felony, police are then able to get a DNA sample, and it's with the buccal swabs right inside the cheek. They can get those, and they actually have that sample saved because it's a felony case. And they can then utilize that sample to look into other cases, and that's how they've solved a lot of other cases too, with people that maybe never had a felony on record in the past, and then maybe 20 years later they get their first felony. They're getting the DNA collected, and then it's linking to all these other cases, these cold cases out there. So they most likely already have her DNA. It'd be very easy for them to get it. She's already in custody anyway, and so they've got a lot to work with here with the DNA aspect.
Will be critical. And if, for instance, you are in custody, that DNA should be very easy to access.
Yes, absolutely. And again, you're comparing one child against the other, because if they are siblings, at least on the maternal side, they would share the same mitochondrial DNA profile.
And if they're half siblings with the same mother, same story.
Same story, yes.
Then the most critical issue would become cause of death.
Right.
How difficult does it become the longer a body has decomposed?
It's very difficult. If there's no soft tissue and you're only looking at skeletal remains, you may not have a cause of death so obvious. There may be no knife marks or bullet trauma to the skeletal remains. There may be no physical evidence of the cause of death.
That can be really difficult there. Again, if we're just looking at skeletal remains, it can be very difficult to find out how the children may have died. And again, I still suspect poison is most likely involved. We don't know for sure. But if it is, that makes it even more difficult. But they can still extract information or get these poisons from within the bones. They can still get that, but it is difficult. It's not an easy process. Again, this is not CSI on television where they're just able to find this information. Sometimes they just simply can't figure these things out, even with the technology that we have. Or it can take sending it off to different labs, because different labs specialize in different things as well, and they have different expertise. So it could go around to a couple different labs to figure out information. So it's going to take some time with that.
And so it's a very difficult analysis.
Can I ask you if there's, say, some sort of chemical agent or poisoning or drug overdose? Would that be evident in the skeletal remains at all?
It's possible to pick up some poisons or toxins, but again, you'd have to eliminate environmental contamination to the remains as a potential source of whatever the substance is, like arsenic or something of that sort. The main focus is on identification, and second focus, cause and manner of death.
Cause and manner would be extremely difficult, again, the more the decomposition has done away with critical evidence, right?
Correct. I would think manner of death would be a little bit easier to determine rather than cause. Manner of death, you have two, and I'm going to say relatively young children, because we don't know precisely what the autopsy results have found. But you would expect young children to be somewhat healthy and not having died of natural causes. So manner of death, I think, would be a little easier for a medical examiner to decide upon rather than cause. Skeletal remains are very, very difficult to pin a cause of death on.
And how willing are juries to accept this sort of arcane and complicated science?
Okay, so I just wanted to show that. There's a little bit more in that interview, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of kind of what this is going to look like with the forensic aspect of it as we learn more. So hopefully these insights have helped you guys. Hopefully you guys appreciate this video. If you do, again, subscribe to my channel, like it, comment. Happy to learn your guys' insights as well. Again, I'm not a doctor. I do have some expertise in different aspects of these kind of cases. But on the forensic side, if you guys have any more information on that, happy to leave your comments. Happy to look at those as well. Had some really good viewers put out some really good information, and I appreciate that. So again, this is Dev with Crime Hive. I'll be back with another video. It may be this case, it may be another case, but we'll see you guys again soon. You guys take care.